Hi, I'm Hannah. This is Theology Therapist. Welcome. Today I'm going to walk you through 3 signs of religious brainwashing. Remember, before we get started, to press the subscribe button. With the bell button so you get notifications on all weekly updates. Let's get going. Okay, so today we are talking about 3 signs of religious brainwashing. So one of the first signs that you need to look out for is groups that are more prone to religious brainwashing are groups that are closed to outsiders or to information. This means that they are cut off from education, other people, culture, society, right? So these groups keep this insulated barrier around them, right? So that means that you're not gonna be able to listen to music that's on the radio, or you might listen to, I don't know, the Christian music station or something, but you're gonna listen to music that is about, or music from your religious group. Or another example of this is movies. It's like, what kind of movies are you allowed to watch? Are you only watching VeggieTales, or can you watch the latest movie that's out at the theater, right? So a lot of religious closed groups, cult groups, fundamentalist groups, they are going to essentially say from the pulpit or not, even what movies are okay or not okay. They also will often talk about, politicians, who's okay, who's not okay. And so when you're on the not okay list, you're insulated from that information. It's just, that that's bad, that's wrong, right? Even about education. So when you think even just about sex education. Sex education oftentimes in these fundamentalist groups is abstinence only. It's nothing before marriage. It's once you're married, then all bets are off, or it's whatever your husband wants, because it's within the confines of a heteronormative or straight sexuality, marriage, relationship, right? There's a limited box of what you can fit into and what's okay. Religious brainwashing happens by keeping this group insular and by preventing outside information from getting in. So when outside information does sneak in, and somebody, maybe it's a new person in the community, or maybe someone happens to, read an article in the Washington Post about dangers of homeschooling, or, etc. That was a recent article. I'm gonna link it here in the bio. And then they bring up in the community, oh my gosh, did you guys see this article? I didn't know that. Like, what do you guys think about these past evangelicals sending their kids to school, right? Well, that conversation is going to be shut down. Or if you're like, hey, did you hear the new Taylor Swift song? Gonna be shut down, right? Because any challenge, anything that's perceived as a threat, or really any challenge is perceived as a threat, that is going to be snuffed out, shut down. Like, we don't talk about that here, right? And so that culture, that environment of not challenging also perpetuates the cycle of religious brainwashing. So keep an eye out for whether outside information is allowed in your group. The second sign is the loss of individuality. So the loss of you may be like, what are you talking? What do you mean by that? So oftentimes these groups will have a really charismatic leader, pastor, or whatever their name is, their religious designation. They often have a really charismatic person doing that. And so what tends to happen is that really charismatic person brings people in close to them, keeps them close. And so similar to that first sign of being closed information, the loss of individuality happens by getting really close to that charismatic leader, because their needs or what they want is going to take priority. And so their needs or their wants, or often what they purport as the needs or wants of the religious community take priority. So this might happen, this is a more extreme example that unfortunately is not uncommon, but if someone experiences abuse, oftentimes what they're told by these leaders is that they need to forgive the abuser, right? Not okay. So the other aspect of loss of individuality is changing dress, interests, habits. So if before you really loved to go to the movies, today that's my example, catch-all, is if you love to go to the movies and then you join this group and they're sort of anti-movies, or they are only movies that are religious movies or things like that. And so you sort of stop going to, like at first you're like, kind of, you catch on, you're like, oh, hey, did you see that new one? And they're like, no. No, we don't do that. And so you kind of catch on that like, that's not cool here. So then maybe you just stop talking about it. But then maybe you also, you're like, well, maybe I won't, So then maybe slowly, you stop going, right? Okay, so like, that's how this process, it's not often overnight, but it is by picking up like the social cues of, oh no, we don't listen to Taylor Swift. Like, oh really? Well, I guess like the tickets were crazy expensive and like it was so chaotic to go to the first concert, so maybe I won't go to this one, right? It's like kind of how that snowballs. They also, these groups can have really, especially for women, they can have really strict defined rules of dress. So for example, my top would not be allowed because it would need to be like here, right? At most. If your top looked like this, someone would be coming to talk to you about leading people to sin. Even for men, there are less, but there are dress codes, and it also depends on your history of religious affiliation. At times, men have as many dress expectations as women, but often, because women are often given the responsibility of being sexual gatekeepers, that responsibility is placed on women. It's not to say that it doesn't happen, but it's just to say that it happens more often with women. So the third sign is that you are not allowed to take breaks from the community. That is a big no-no, because what happens, like, let's think about that. What happens if you take a break from the community? So one, that might mean that you are like dabbling in outside information or like outside culture, or like you're experimenting, and that's not okay, because then you might come back and you might come back with new ideas that isn't kosher in this religious group. You're also not allowed to take breaks from the community because your religious involvement is often also tied to your religious ticket into heaven, if you will, even if that's not the way that your religious affiliation described it. So maybe like the celestial kingdom or etc. So you are not allowed to take breaks from the community, and because your involvement is tied to your ticket to heaven, the more you do, the better you are, right? Like the better person, the better Christian or Mormon or JW or Muslim or Jew, like any sort of, all of these, like the more you do, the better you are. That is how taking breaks from the community is closely tied to this, because it's tied to your ability to get into the promised land, whatever that may be, and because it also limits or mitigates some of that potential for outside information to get in. So these are 3 signs of religious brainwashing. Make sure to look out in your community or your loved ones for these, because these are red flags. Great to see you today. I'm Hannah. Remember, subscribe, press that bell so you can get notifications on all weekly updates. I'm also going to put in this corner, up in the top, a link to a video about how religions use guilt to motivate you. So I think if you like this video, I think you're really gonna like that one. Okay, I'll see you next time.